Hello all, just wanted to give you an update on the ACW 6mm project. So working on trees. So in most scales, 28mm, if even 15mm, what you would do is you take kind of individual trees, make them or purchase them, and then put them onto a wood base, and that would give you kind of the canopy. But in 6mm, since the scale is so tiny, I think you can actually get it to look like kind of more of a real scale. So I've decided to go with kind of a canopy. And so I experimented with this. Any of the canopies that I've seen out there are kind of you take a base or some piece of wood or maybe foam, and then you put clump foliage on top of that, and then you have kind of little toothpicks that stick underneath that. I wasn't terribly happy with how that looked. I thought I might be able to do something better. So what I decided was to just go with clumps of foam, and then paint them up, pluck them to make them look like a grouping of trees. So this is kind of the first little experiments that I did with it. So I plucked the foam, I got it into kind of a shape that would look like trees from a distance, and then I painted them, and then also I tried to flock them. So here are just a couple of the flocked ones that I have. As you can see, with any flocking, it does give you kind of a nice texture, but a lot of it kind of rubs off and it comes off very easily. It adds to the expense of making it, and it's just messy in general. So wasn't terribly happy with that. Same thing with just kind of the homemade flock that I had. I it's kind of like sawdust basically put together and colored. And again, messy, comes off, doesn't, I don't think, really give you the greatest of texture. So in the end, what I decided to do was just go with a piece of foam and paint it. So saturate it, get it stained to the color that I wanted to start with, a base color, and then I came in and just did some high dry brush around the edge. So this is kind of like the experimental version of it. So you can see that you have the sharp edges, which is kind of a detriment to it. But I also wanted to get the idea of having some tree trunks coming out, and so I added in some actual toothpicks there. So this is the experiment, however. So what I ended up with was something that looked more like this. So again, you can kind of see the sharp edges, which, it's kind of hard to get rid of those. You can go in with a torch and kind of melt them down a little bit, but then you got to breathe that stuff in, and I don't think it really adds much to it. Also, it's a little harder to highlight. So you can see that I also plucked it in a different way, and so there's actually kind of a canopy edge that is undercut, and then on the undercut I've added in some clump foliage, and then also some various colored toothpicks all around the edge to kind of give you a feel of a forest. So if you are around a forest or driving through the woods, not trying driving through the woods, but just driving, and you see little clumps of trees in forest, you'll see that most of the trees are roughly the same size. I mean, this time of year they'll start to change later in the summer into fall. Obviously, they turn different colors, but for the most part, dead of summer, everything's just kind of green, and it's got some shades of green here and there, but it doesn't vary that much. So pretty happy with how they came out. So I'll show you some video of how I actually made this. So what you do is you just take a piece of foam, and I found that the easiest foam to work with, I think, is the kind of memory foam. It's got just the kind of texture, and the way it tears is nice. This piece here is actually a piece of memory foam. It also paints up really, really nicely. You can use other foams. There's a denser foam that I used, and it was good too. The lighter dense foam was not as good. It didn't tear very well, and I just don't think it really held the paint as good. So I would just recommend kind of the memory foam thing. It doesn't have to be the exact memory foam, but you can find it at hobby stores all around. The ones that I got they came in 24 by 24 sheets, and then I started with the 3-inch thick sheets. That gives you almost 8 centimeters tall trees, which is about 80 feet in scale compared to the 6 millimeter trees. So I thought that they looked the best. There was some that I made a little bit taller. There were some that I made a little shorter, just to give you some varying scale in that. So once I got it all plucked and kind of plucked out the under part here, then what I did was I soaked it in paint, saturated it all the way through, and then wrung that out and then let that dry for, gosh, a couple days, because it just takes a long time for foam to completely dry out. I'm sure if I really, really pushed this really hard in the middle, there would probably still be some wetness to it. So once that was dry, then it stiffened up the foam a bit, and it was pretty easy to come in and start to dry brush. And so I put in 3 different colors. I always work in threes at least to give me some depth. So a little lighter color than the base that was there, and then on top of that, I added more and more foam onto it, or color brightening, making it brighter and brighter as you go. You can kind of see here in this section the darker there, and then a little lighter, and then even lighter to give you the highlights on the very tips of the trees. So same idea. I have 3 or 4 different color of toothpicks that I painted up, as well as different colored clump foliage that I placed all around. I'm really happy with how these came out. I think they're going to look great on the table, and I hope that you have found it helpful, and maybe it'll give you some inspiration for your 6 millimeter tables. So that's it. Have a good day.